At 68, Sally Hawkins speaks as if every word has already lived a long life inside her. The applause has faded. The cameras no longer follow her footsteps with the same hunger. And yet, in the quiet space she now inhabits, something remains unresolved. Not loud enough to be called anger, not soft enough to be forgiven. Time has been generous to her career. It has not been merciful to her memory. She was once the embodiment of tenderness on screen, a face audiences trusted instinctively, a voice that seemed to promise empathy, restraint, humanity. But behind that gentleness lived a discipline forged early, the discipline of endurance, of absorbing disappointment without protest, of surviving emotional fractures in silence. Now, sitting far from the lights that once defined her, Sally allows herself a rare honesty. Not a confession meant to shock, not a revelation designed to redeem her image, but a quiet admission, delivered without drama. There are 5 people she will never forgive. Not because she hasn't tried, not because she doesn't understand the complexity of human failure, but because forgiveness, she learned, is not always a moral victory. Sometimes it is simply a form of erasure. Some wounds, if forgiven too easily, lose their meaning. Some betrayals, if softened by time, rewrite history in dishonest ways. At 68, Sally Hawkins does not seek reconciliation with the past. She seeks accuracy. And in that accuracy, 5 names remain, untouched by time, immune to apology, etched into a silence that never truly healed. She was born in London in 1976 into a home where sensitivity was encouraged, but certainty was rare. Her father, a quiet illustrator, worked behind closed doors, teaching her that creation often happens in solitude. Her mother, practical and protective, worried about a world that felt too sharp for a child who listened too deeply. Sally learned early how to disappear without leaving. At school, she was observant rather than outspoken, absorbing moods the way others collected opinions. When illness entered her life, unpredictable, misunderstood, it reinforced a lesson she would carry for decades. Vulnerability invites judgment before it invites care. There were moments that never made headlines. Teachers who doubted her seriousness, adults who mistook her silence for fragility, friends who drifted away when patience was required. Each small dismissal settled quietly, layering itself into something heavier than any single wound. She did not grow angry, she grew careful. Books became shelters. Drawing, movement, and later performance offered structure to emotions she could not name aloud. On stage, she could finally speak without interruption. But even there, approval felt conditional, temporary, something that could be withdrawn without explanation. What formed in those early years was not resentment, but memory, a precise internal archive of how easily trust could be misread, how quickly empathy could vanish. Forgiveness was never taught to her as release. It appeared instead as a demand, something expected from the quiet, the accommodating, the kind. By the time she chose acting as her path, Sally Hawkins already understood that some boundaries are not walls. They are survival. Recognition arrived quietly at first, not as triumph, but as permission. Small roles where silence mattered more than volume, where restraint became power. Sally Hawkins did not conquer the screen, she inhabited it. Directors noticed how she listened on camera, how emotion traveled through stillness rather than declaration. Her ascent was built on patience. Years of theater sharpened her precision, teaching her how to hold a pause until it breathed. When film finally opened its doors wider, she stepped through without spectacle. Happy-go-lucky changed everything. Applause followed, awards followed, and suddenly her name carried weight. Yet even in celebration, she remained watchful, aware of how quickly admiration could turn conditional. Success multiplied expectations. Interviews softened her into a symbol of warmth, simplicity, approachability. She played along carefully, but behind the rehearsed humility, pressure accumulated. Casting rooms promised opportunity, then withdrew it without explanation. Contracts dissolved. Commitments shifted. Praise proved fleeting, loyalty unreliable. The more visible she became, the lonelier the work felt. Fame brought rooms full of people, but fewer conversations that lasted beyond usefulness. She learned which smiles were strategic, which compliments were transactional. The industry rewarded availability, not fragility. Strength, she realized, meant endurance without complaint. There were moments of wonder, standing under studio lights, surrounded by crews who believed in her vision, finding collaborators who respected her rhythm, winning acclaim for performances built on vulnerability rather than dominance. Those moments sustained her. But beneath the glow, fractures formed, a sense that success required constant self-negotiation, that kindness could be exploited, that being underestimated was not always accidental. Sally Hawkins rose not by demanding space, but by adapting to it. Each achievement confirmed her talent, yet also clarified a truth she could not ignore. The higher she climbed, the more visible betrayal became. In ascent, the distance between sincerity and convenience widened. By the time she reached the height others envied, she had already learned caution. Applause no longer guaranteed safety. Recognition did not ensure respect. And trust, once extended, would never again be offered lightly. Her rise was real. So was the cost it quietly introduced. With every new role, she measured silence against exposure, choosing carefully when to speak and when to retreat. The climb taught her visibility without protection is dangerous, and admiration without loyalty leaves marks. Ascension sharpened her craft, but also hardened her memory, preparing her for fractures yet unnamed in later years. The fractures did not arrive all at once. They entered quietly, disguised as professional misunderstandings, postponed conversations, promises left deliberately vague. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be named without sounding ungrateful. That, perhaps, was the most painful part. One project ended without explanation. Another moved forward without her name attached. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered. She was praised publicly, then erased privately. In rooms where loyalty once felt certain, she sensed a subtle withdrawal, a collective decision made without her presence. There was no confrontation, only absence. For someone who had built her career on trust and attentiveness, the silence felt louder than rejection. She questioned herself first. Had she misunderstood, asked for too much, expected consistency where none was promised? The doubt lingered longer than the loss itself. Outside the industry, personal ties strained as well. Friendships reshaped by imbalance. Support offered conditionally. Understanding extended only when convenient. She learned that empathy, when unreciprocated, becomes exhaustion. These moments did not break her openly. They taught her something colder, that sincerity does not protect against dismissal, that kindness does not secure permanence, and that being reasonable often means being replaceable. The wounds were not dramatic enough to be discussed, not visible enough to be defended. Yet they settled deeply, altering the way she entered new collaborations, new friendships, new promises. From that point forward, Sally Hawkins did not expect loyalty. She observed it. She did not seek reassurance. She waited for consistency. Some names were already forming in her memory, not out of vengeance, but clarity. Faces associated with turning points where trust quietly ended. 5 figures remain. They are not spoken of at dinners, not revisited in interviews, not framed as lessons neatly learned. They exist in the quiet space where memory refuses to soften, not out of bitterness, but out of accuracy. The first is a man who once promised shelter, a mentor whose confidence felt reassuring, whose praise seemed sincere. In the early years, he stood beside her, translating her sensitivity into legitimacy for rooms that required permission. He spoke a belief. He spoke a protection. But when the landscape shifted, when alliances hardened and reputations became negotiable, his voice receded. Decisions were made elsewhere. Support dissolved into formality. He never betrayed her loudly. He simply chose convenience over courage. What she cannot forgive is not his absence, but the illusion of loyalty that came before it. The second is a collaborator who mistook vulnerability for access. The work demanded closeness, trust, a shared emotional terrain. She offered it fully, but boundaries blurred, respect thinned. When discomfort appeared, It was reframed as difficulty. When she asserted herself, she became inconvenient. The language shifted quietly, efficiently. She learned how easily kindness can be rewritten as weakness, how quickly openness can be punished. This betrayal left no public trace, but it altered how she would ever share herself again. The third belongs to her private life, someone bound not by contracts but by shared years, a relationship built on familiarity, on the unspoken promise of mutual care. She gave patience, constancy, emotional presence. Over time, care became expectation. Support became obligation. When she finally withdrew to preserve herself, the response was silence. No conflict, no repair, just absence. The pain here was not dramatic. It was definitive. She understood then that she had been valued for endurance, not for reciprocity. This wound lingered longest because it was personal, not professional. The fourth has no single face. It is a system, an industry that celebrates fragility on screen and rejects it off camera. One that praises authenticity while demanding resilience without accommodation. When her health required understanding, conversations grew cautious. Opportunities slowed. Replacement became easier than adaptation. No one said no. They simply moved on. She does not hate the system. She recognizes it, but she does not forgive how effortlessly it traded her humanity for efficiency. And the fifth, the most difficult, is herself. Not for lacking strength, not for feeling deeply, but for confusing silence with dignity, for believing that endurance would eventually earn protection, for forgiving too quickly in the name of harmony. She remembers the moments she minimized her own needs to remain agreeable, the times she accepted erasure as professionalism, the years she trusted that empathy, offered freely, would be returned. She does not punish herself for this. She understands why it happened, but she acknowledges the cost, the delayed boundaries, the unspoken refusals, the clarity that arrived only after damage had settled. These five figures are not held in anger. They are held in truth. Forgiveness, Sally Hawkins learned, is not a moral obligation. Sometimes it rewrites the past too generously. Sometimes it asks the injured to disappear quietly. By naming what she will never forgive, she does not cling to pain. She gives it definition. And in doing so, she reclaims something she once surrendered too easily, the right to remember without apology. At 68, Sally Hawkins no longer feels the need to resolve every memory. She understands now that some stories are not meant to be repaired, only acknowledged. In the quiet rhythm of her present life, she moves carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect for what she has survived. The past no longer demands explanation. It sits beside her, calm, defined, no longer confusing. The names she will never forgive no longer haunt her nights. They have lost their power to surprise her. What remains is not resentment, but clarity, the kind that arrives only when illusion has fully dissolved. Forgiveness, she learned, is not the absence of pain, nor is it proof of maturity. Sometimes it is simply a choice, and sometimes the bravest choice is refusal. To refuse forgetting, to refuse rewriting one's own wounds into something more convenient for others. In the end, Sally Hawkins does not present her story as a lesson. She offers it as a mirror, a reminder that dignity does not always come from letting go, but from remembering honestly. And perhaps the final question is not who we forgive, but what it costs us when we do. Can we live peacefully without forgiveness? Or is remembering the price we pay for having loved deeply at all